Welcome to Know Your Sheet. From tracking targets to budget battles, I've got a sheet for that. Let's get organized so you can know your sheet too. In this mini-series, we will work to know your budget sheet. This mini-series will walk you through setting up a spreadsheet to help you keep track of your income and expenses so you can start taking more control of where your money goes. In this episode, we will continue from where we left off last time, where we already listed our income and expenses and have data totals calculated for each month. Okay, so before we get into the irregular expenses, what we're going to do is we're going to add an average calculation so we can see what our averages look like over the months. There are two types of averages that I like to do. There's the regular average where you just average for the 12 months. Then I like to do an average if. In a working budget spreadsheet, you don't have all the months recorded yet. So I only want to average if the amount is not zero, meaning we actually have some data there. It doesn't make sense to average to include the months that you haven't logged anything for yet because it will be incorrectly lower than normal because you don't have the numbers for those months yet. So you're averaging a month where the income is zero or the expense is zero, which is incorrect, which I'll show you how to do that as we type out the formulas. So for just averaging January through December, we can just use the average formula. And then to do the average if, we will do average if, and then we will again pick January through December, but we will add the condition of greater than zero. Let's go ahead and also format these cells as currency cells. Now, let's add a section for irregular expenses. So, expenses that aren't paid every month. Let's add security cameras, a P.O. box, car insurance, bug spray, and car maintenance. And let's go ahead and add a totals row. No surprise there, same as every other section we have. We will also go ahead and copy the averages formula down. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and format this a little bit to make it easier to read. For P.O. box, let's just have one payment in January. So for car insurance, let's have it where we have to pay every 3 months, starting in March here. And security cams, let's say we pay that bill once a year in May. Car maintenance, we do every June, which is a larger amount than normal, and then maybe bug spray is in July, just before it gets really hot in the summer. Okay, now let's take a look at the different total rows and determine which average makes the most sense. Income, we definitely want to use the average if. Regular expenses, average if. Utilities, average if. Irregular expenses, definitely want to use the average for the whole year. Credit cards, average if. Total bills and in and out difference, average if. And let's go ahead and combine these columns so that we just have the one average column. And let's go ahead and review the total bills and make sure that the irregular expenses is included in that total. Before we get into more detail about irregular expenses, let's go ahead and make a copy of this sheet so that we can make the modifications and you can compare it to the original. We'll go ahead and call this new sheet 2025 V2. Okay, so back to irregular expenses. If you need help being diligent or disciplined, it may be smart to create an account to separate the money for these bills to ensure you are setting aside enough money every month. So let's start with a new sheet within this same worksheet so we can track the irregular expenses. We'll want to track what the expense is, the amount, how many months these amounts cover, and how much that calculates to monthly. Since we've already listed the expenses in our budget sheet, let's just go ahead and copy those over so I don't have to retype them. Let's go ahead and record the amounts that are due for each of these expenses. And we'll want to format that to currency. And then we'll want to note how many months those payments covers. And with those values, we can calculate how much a month we should be setting aside every month for each of these bills. So on our budget sheet, let's go ahead and make a copy of the irregular expenses section down below. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this section hold expenses because this is not what we're paying out every month, it's what we're holding every month. And then what we're going to do is use the XLOOKUP formula to look up the amount that should be saved every month for this bill for each of these expenses. When doing lookups, make sure you're careful about when you're using absolute reference versus relative references to cells, because if in this case we're looking up security cams, as we copy the formula across, we don't want the reference that we're using to look up to change from column to column as we copy to the right. We want to make sure that it's constantly referencing column A. So that's what the dollar signs mean against the letters and numbers when we're referencing cells. On episode 4, I will have a link to the repository that has a copy of all of these spreadsheets for you. For right now, let's copy this all across and make sure the lookups are correct. Now, let's highlight when these bills are actually paid out. So at a glance, it's easy to see when these bills are supposed to be paid. Even though we should be setting aside money every month, we want to know when these amounts actually leave our accounts. so that is one way to give yourself a bit of a visual of how much you should be setting aside every month. Let's go back to the irregular expenses sheet. Let's go ahead, like everything else, let's get a total row in here. The total here should be the same as the total for every month in your budget spreadsheet. Now, let's spell this out in a little more detail in a more accurate way of how much you should have in your savings or in your account to pay these bills. So let's start with copying the January through December header from the budget sheet over. And we'll also copy the irregular expenses when they're due into the irregular expenses sheet. Okay, so once we have that, we're going to calculate how much money should be building up until we have to pay that bill. Also, let's go ahead and highlight where the amount is due, the months that it actually needs to be paid out. And we're going to do some simple adding and subtracting to see how much money we should be building up each month for each of these bills. Okay, so once we have this table filled out, how much is building up each month until the bill is due, let's go ahead and calculate how much should be sitting in your savings each month if you are on track to pay all these bills. So this is the minimum that should be in your account to ensure that you will have enough building up to pay these bills. And then, of course, to be more accurate, because in our budget sheet at that point in that month, you've already deducted the amount from your account. So we'll have how much is in your savings after you pay the amount. So there's the how much you should have total, but once you've paid out the amounts that you need to pay out, there is a remaining amount, and that's actually what shows up in our budget sheet. So we'll go ahead and calculate that. Subtract out if a bill is due, remove that from how much is in your account because that would have already been paid out by the time the month is over. So for all of the months that don't have any bills paid out, it'd be the same as the sum of how much you should have built up. So let's just work through all of this. Okay, awesome. Now we have how much after the bills are paid should be sitting in your savings account or in your account to ensure that you are on track to pay your bills. Let's go back to the budget sheet and add a row for savings. Before January bills and income starts, this is how much is in your account or in your savings. And then each month as income comes in and bills go out, how much should be remaining in your account or in your savings. Let's get that calculated and copied through December. And for completeness, let's go ahead and make sure that the average is calculated in here as well. Let's go ahead and add a row for the minimum that needs to be in your account to ensure that you will be keeping up with your bills. So let's copy and paste that over. And now we can see side by side how much is in our account and how much we need to ensure we're building up enough to pay our bills. And to keep this clean, let's go ahead and remove the hold expenses section here because we have a whole sheet that's calculating and showing all this information. And now that our spreadsheet is getting a bit large, let's shrink this down a little bit so that it'll be a little easier for us to see things in one shot. And I want you to be able to see as much of this as possible without me constantly scrolling up and down. Now that we have the data and a clearer picture of what our ins and outs look like, it's good to circle back to our net amount, which is what is in our savings, what's left in our account. How much money do we actually have left over after all these bills? Keep in mind that your credit card bills include your fun and more extravagant spendings, so you're going to want to group those separately and review those statements and how your bank or your credit cards help you categorize those. You'll want to look at those statements and reports to help you organize and figure out where you might be able to cut expenses or limit them. But with this budget sheet, you have an idea of how much you're spending and how much is left over and seeing where you want to make adjustments. And with that, we have our decent version of our budget sheet. Check out the next video in this mini-series to see how we will expand and grow this spreadsheet so we can add some conditional formatting and visualizations to help us digest the data. This series has 4 planned episodes. But if you've got questions or requests, leave them in the comments and I'll dig through them all and create a part 5 based on what you want added to the budget sheet, because your sheet should work for you. Got a spreadsheet win or a formula fail? Drop it in the comments and share your sheet. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep your cells clean and your formulas tight. And remember, don't just use your sheet, know your sheet.